Okay, so we're almost ready to deploy our app to Heroku. Just double check your settings, make sure they match with mine, apart from the URL obviously for where it's going to be deployed to. The config variables, make sure you have these spelt correctly inside here. All of these can give you a problem if you've got this wrong. And I've purposely left in a bad key for Cloudinary so that we can take a look at where to look when something goes wrong. And make sure you've got the build pack. You may need to refresh this page to see this populated after you've ran the command in the terminal, and make sure the build pack matches what I'm using as well. So once you're happy with your settings, we'll go back to VS Code, and what we're going to do is we're going to set up a production connection string for Heroku. And we'll keep in our app settings development.json, we'll keep our default connection. We're fine with keeping this connection string in our app settings, but what we need is a production connection string. Now, I mentioned that the Heroku connection string can change, and you don't have any control over that. But what you do have control over is reading from the environment in Heroku. So what we can do is go to our application service extensions, and we're going to replace this with something that we can use whether we're in development mode or production. And we want something that's going to take a look at the database connection string in Heroku and use that as the connection string. So what we'll do is we'll just go back to our student assets folder, and inside here is a Heroku connection string. And what we're going to do is just copy this, and I'll explain what's going on. So what we'll do, we'll just copy this connection string into our clipboard, and we'll remove the existing services add-db context, and we'll just paste in what we got from our clipboard. And it didn't do a great job of formatting this correctly, so I'm just going to shuffle things over, and we need to bring in system to get access to the environment. So what this is going to do for us, and the snippet is provided because of the infinite possibilities to make typos, spelling mistakes, and whatever problems you can manage to add into this file, and this snippet is going to prevent that. Now, this original snippet came from Stack Overflow anyway. This is not my own code that I wrote initially to do this, and this is a common method to go and get the database connection string from Heroku and use that as our connection string we pass to Heroku itself as well. Because Heroku can change, I should say, the database connection string at any time. So if we take a look at this, then we can see that we're getting the environment first of all. That's going to be development or production. We're creating a variable to store our connection string. We're checking to see which mode we're in, and if we're in development, then we're just going to use our connection string from our app settings.json. If we're not in development, we're in production, and then we're going to get various settings from Heroku. And the environment, the database URL, we saw that in our configuration. And then we've just got some variables that's going to create a connection string based on what's contained in that database URL configuration. And we can see that our server is going to be set to this, our port is going to be set to this, our user ID it's going to get from the Heroku connection string, as well as the password and a database. And then there's a couple of extras added on here based on issues that students have had deploying to Heroku in the past, and these extra bits solve that particular problem. So with this in place, what we can do now is actually deploy our application to Heroku. And what we'll do is we'll go back to our terminal. Let's just clear this screen, and we need to commit our changes. Now there's quite a few changes inside here because this also includes the www root folder. So what we'll do is we'll say git add and then followed by a period, and this stages all of our changes. And then we need a commit before we can push this up to Heroku. So we'll say git commit -m, and I'll just call it Heroku deploy, and press return. And this commits all of our changes. And what we can do then, we can say git push Heroku and main, and press return. Now this is going to build and deploy our application, so it might take a minute or two. So what I'll do is I'm just going to pause the video and come back to this hopefully once our application is deployed. And what we should have once this is deployed is a fairly clean output that says our application is deployed to Heroku on this URL. And if we just scroll up and take a look at what happened when we did this, well, it uses the .NET 5 runtime and goes ahead and installs this with our application and then builds and restores and builds a production version of our .NET application and then deploys all the files to Heroku with just that one command. And what we can do now is we can go and take a look at our new shiny published application. And what we'll do, we'll head over to our browser and let's just find a tab to paste in the URL that I've got. And what we should hopefully see is a working application. And we can see our application live on the internet, and let's test the functionality, of course. So what I want to do is be able to log in as bob@test.com. We were still seeding our users into our database, and because of the code that we have in our program.cs class, then we automatically create and migrate using our migration to the new database on Heroku. So we should be able to log in with the same user that we were using previously. And I'm taken to my application and I can see my application running. Amazing. And it was so easy to do. And we should have our functionality, so we can go to activities. And if I click on to view an activity, okay, so there's a bit of loading as the image comes in, but that will be cached on the browser, and next time it will be loaded more quickly. And if I type in test 1, do we have our chat functionality? Yes, we do. But does this mean our application is working? Well, I left a bad configuration variable inside my Heroku configuration. So let's see what happens if I go to Bob's profile and go to the photos, add a photo, and let's drag in one of the images. And if I click on the check mark, then what we should see is we'll be taken to an exception. And we know what the error is, but if you see this page and you don't know what's happened, then this is not enough information, I guarantee it, to start troubleshooting anything. So the purpose of leaving a bad config variable is to show you how to find errors in Heroku. So I'll just go back to the Heroku dashboard, and what we can see, if we're inside our application, we've got an option to click on more, and we can go and view logs. And inside our logs is the same as what we see inside our terminal when we're running our application locally. And because of our exception handler, we're logging exceptions out into the console, which means that we'll be able to see what actually happened. Although I'm not seeing enough information, it hasn't captured the early part of this, so I don't really know what's happened yet. All I know is that exception middleware has triggered here, and I know that I was trying to upload a photo. So what we want to do is, if we don't have enough information, is repeat the behavior. So I'm going to go back to the app, I'm going to go back to my profile, I'm going to go back to the photos, add a photo, try and do the same thing again, add the check mark, go back to the logs, and what we'll see is the actual exception coming in as that activity takes place. And what we should have now is more information. And if we go take a look at the start of our exception, then this is what's coming back from Cloudinary. We got the exception and it says invalid signature string to sign. Now, it's a bit vague, this specific error, but this is telling us that we've got a problem with our API secret key. I wish it said you've got a problem with your API secret key, but it doesn't. So what we should be able to do is make that fix inside our settings, and I'm going to fix this. I'm going to replace the key with a valid one. I won't display it, of course. And I've just replaced that key. Now what's going to happen is when we change our config variables, our app is going to restart. And what we'll need to do is go back and make sure it has restarted. So I'll just refresh the page. And that looks good. So now if I go to Bob again and go into the photos, add photo, and drag in bat1 once again, and click the check mark, what we should now see is this working. And it does. And we can see the images updating over there as well. So wow, we've deployed our app, but is our work complete? Not quite, as I will explain very soon.